Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas. Our ongoing study in the theology of Karl Barth. We're looking at the Cambridge Companion to Karl Barth. We're going to look at our eighth lesson. We're going to take a look at his doctrine of salvation in an essay by Colin Gunton, pages 143 to 159. We'll look at it in 3 moments. Let's take a look at block 1. We're going to look at the threefold act of salvation. Initially, we'll take a look at the person of Christ and his saving work. Salvation is an eschatological concept and an eschatological reality. In salvation, we are taken up into the life of the triune God. And for Barth, salvation equals fulfillment of covenant. It accomplishes the reconciliation between God and humanity. And it is a signification of God with us. Therefore, the election of grace equals the whole of the gospel. Remember, Barth, in our previous essay, proposed the doctrine of universal election. The election of grace equals the whole of the gospel. It's predicated on the doctrine of election being in Christ himself. Salvation equals the eschatological completion of this universal election. So if you look at note 2, the eschatological election is followed by divine substitutionary bearing. The cross is God's substitutionary bearing of man's sin. Christ bears away the wrath of God in his humiliation. In the resurrection, God conveys his affirmative verdict toward humanity, his decisive verdict concerning the cross. So for Barth, what remains is the outworking of the already realized eschatological salvation. We attest to that which is already completed. We affirm that which is already completed. So we'll take a look at the summary statement, which is always the third note. In 1:3, eschatological election and substitutionary bearing both lead to the threefold efficacious act of salvation. It's reflected in the 3 offices of ministry concerning Christ, his priestly, kingly, and prophetic office. In his priestly office, he enters into the humiliation unto death as Son of God, which is universal in its scope, universal in its universality of electing. The universal divine will slays the old self, the old Adam, and it is an action of the divine judge who takes on our judgment within himself. Christ becomes the judge, judged in our place. There is a gracious reorientation of the self through Christ's passion, through the humiliation of the Son of God who has entered into the far country of our sin. Now, under the kingly office, eschatological reality is realized in the pardon spoken in the present. This pardon determines the being of humanity. And that leads to our responsive correspondence, corresponding to that which is already accomplished, that salvation of the self-giving God that has already been accomplished in the atonement of Jesus Christ as a responsive correspondence, a response to the already accomplished pardon. Under the prophetic office, the Lord who humbled himself as servant now becomes the Son of Man, the servant who is exalted to Lord. Christ as royal man is head and Lord of humanity and the church. Christ as active subject rules as Lord in his exaltation as Son of Man to the right hand of the Father. So in the priestly office, we have the Son of God entering into the humiliation of the cross itself and the far country of man's sin. In the prophetic office, we have Christ being lifted up in exaltation as Son of Man to the right hand of the Father. That gives us our first theoretical triad in the first moment. Salvation is eschatological election, through which we are taken up into the henosis unification with God's self through Christ. It includes a substitutionary bearing by Christ. The old man has been crucified and set aside, and that allows the creation of a promise for new life. and that leads to the mediation of Christ as priest, king, and prophet through entering into the humiliation of the cross and then being exalted as Son of Man to the right hand of the Father. That gives us our theoretical look at the doctrine of salvation. We're ready to move on to the concrete moment. Now, if you look at block 2, we're going to take a look at the concrete moment, which is always the middle term. Christ's mediation becomes concrete as justification, sanctification, and vocation. So the act of Christ as Son of God entering into the humiliation of man's sin unto the far country, coupled with the exaltation of the Son of Man to the right hand of the Father, leads to our concrete realization of justification, sanctification, and vocation. So if you look at note 1, justification, the kingdom of God and human justification are both dynamic concepts. The crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension are all universal in their scope. They're all abbreviated under the doctrine of universal election. They're universal in their scope and universal in their bearing. The exaltation of humanity is that which has become real and true in the exaltation of the Son of Man to the right hand of the Father. Through Christ's humiliation and exaltation, we have been drawn up into a process of kenosis unification with God's self as a process of becoming. There is an already accomplished atonement. There is an already accomplished justification, which we attest to as believers. Now, if you look at note 2, sanctification as concrete is inaugurated in the declaration of pardon in the Christ event, which transitions to the enabling of the self for participation in the dikaiosune righteousness of God. The believer is seized in a new, determinate orientation toward Christ's history. The mediation of Christ empowers our sanctification as exalted Son of Man and as Kyrios Lord. Through the methodology of Christ's revelatory self-disclosure and through his klesis call of summoning us into discipleship, this concrete sanctification takes place. It's through the lordship of Christ and his klesis call, which is ongoing. That takes us to vocation. Now, under vocation is necessarily communal and involves a gathering within the ecclesia church of the called out ones. Eschatological vocation is inaugurated here. We live in response to the ongoing klesis call of Christ's word, through which we work out our practical ethics of reconciliation. So our concrete inserted triad will depict justification, sanctification, and vocation. Under justification, the concrete realization of unification with God's kingdom becomes real for us through the already accomplished atonement. Under sanctification, the lordship of Christ mediates and enables us through his word, his klesis call, and his word of summoning to live in discipleship. Vocation is always within the church, the ecclesia, where we have a spirit-driven ethics of reconciliation taking place within the church. That takes us on to our third moment. Now, under the third moment, we're going to look at the saving significance of the Christ event. And of course, we're going to look at sovereignty. Salvation is abbreviated under the doctrine of universal election. It's an outcome of the divine self-giving. It's the realization of God's being in relation to and inclusive of all of creation, which is gathered up within this realization of God's being. The cross signifies the orientation of reconciliation for God's kingdom, which is veiled yet present in the secular world. Our salvation consists of the acknowledgement and the attestation and the confession of that which God has already done in the atonement of the Christ event, as already completed in a sovereign way, which we confess and attest to in faith. Now, under Note 2, Universal Salvation, the Christ event is a contemporary event to all times and all ages, As believers, we participate in the glory, the doxa glory, of Christ's ongoing history. Election precedes creation. Therefore, God freely ties himself in a covenant way to creation and to all of humanity, even before the foundation of the world. Therefore, the created order becomes the place of covenant unveiling for the believer. And Christ eschatologically gains victory over evil and over chaos through his lordship of word event in ongoing advent moments of his klesis call in his word. And so that leads us to divine self-determination and divine self-disclosure as our summary statement. God's self-determination is inclusive of his movement toward humanity in an incarnate henosis unification through the Christ event and the Son. And that the entirety of election is to be understood as taken up in the personhood of Christ. We discussed this in an earlier essay. The entirety of election is taken up in the personhood of Christ. Christ's priestly office abbreviates his kingly pardon and the prophetic word event of the Christ event. Tremendous lesson on salvation, excellent essay on salvation, and it absolutely takes up the fact that it is abbreviated under a concept of eschatological universal election. It does include a substitutionary bearing of all of humanity's sin on the cross. Our sin is nailed to the cross, buried and set aside. And then the mediation of Christ as priest, king, and prophet takes over in his lordship. We are justified, we are sanctified, we are entering into a new creation of vocation. We are justified as we are lifted up on that henosis unification with God's self. We are sanctified through discipleship in responding in correspondence to the klesis call of Christ. We live a vocation of an ethics of reconciliation. Tremendous, powerful lesson in this essay on salvation. And it did, after leading us through the concrete aspect of justification and sanctification and our vocation as believers within the church, we do realize that we are involved in an entirety of sovereign election, which is enclosed within the personhood of Christ. Never abstract truth for Barth. Abstractions and abstract notions are negated by Barth. We look at the personhood of Christ to understand salvation. We look at the personhood of Christ to understand eschatological election. We look at the personhood of Christ to understand the substitutionary bearing on the cross and the eschatological future of resurrection and ascension. In that way, our vocation is a vocation under the Kyrios Lordship of Jesus Christ at the right hand of the Father, where we also are written into his heart as the book of life, where we exist in a new, reclaimed unification with God's self, a restored fellowship with God the Father through Christ and his faithful obedience to his Father. Terrific lesson. We have a great look here at an essay that corresponds very properly with our essay on Christology and with our essay on election. All three work together in a powerful way. The essay on election, Christology, and salvation are all interpenetrating each other. We need to understand this essay in that regard of its interpenetration with Christology, of course, and with the doctrine of election. And that's going to give us a great eighth lesson. We've actually gotten into 160 pages of the Cambridge Companion now, and we'll move on from here to take up the next essay, which will begin on page 160.